We are Mike and Jeanie, and we restore old houses. In 2021, we moved to South Carolina and bought a 120-year-old Victorian house. Follow along as we put the polish back on this Victorian masterpiece.
Today's program is sponsored by the generous support of our patrons. Your support helps to further our historic preservation efforts. For more information, visit patreon.com/1834 Restoration House. Welcome back to 1834 Restoration House.
It's still a very chilly day here at the old Victorian house, and we have projects.
Yes.
Actually, we have the same projects we had last week, only this time we're taking them just a little bit further along. So we're going to be looking at the HVAC system up in the attic again, and I have some exciting developments on that. And you have some interesting things going on with your sewing.
Yes, with the drapes.
Yep.
We sure do.
A lot of you have talked about the drapes and what you like and what you don't like, and so we're going to incorporate some of those ideas.
Yes.
And finally, we're going back to the wood shop and try to finish up that box joint jig.
Sounds great. Let's get started.
Mm-hmm. In last week's episode, we talked about buying our lumber from a real sawmill because the lumber that's used in this house is real 2-inch by 6-inch lumber. And you cannot buy this stuff at your big box stores or even the local lumber yards. They just don't carry it anymore. So we had to have it custom cut. And this is southern yellow pine right here, very nice wood. It has a really beautiful rough sawn texture to it, which in, say, 5 years or so will kind of darken down and look like the rest of it and be nice and splintery, too. Right now it's soft and cuddly. So we did this, and we had a couple of questions about that, like how does the cost compare to, say, lumberyard lumber? We found that it actually is the same as what you pay for in a big box store, but if you consider that you're getting more wood because it's full dimension, it actually costs you less. So that's nice, and it's also very straight, very square. One other thing I wanted to mention is that this is green wood, which means that it's cut wet, and it's very, very heavy because it's full of water. For construction, this is fine, no problem whatsoever. Would I use it for fine furniture making? No. I would want to certainly dry it first and get it down to where the moisture content is very low. Well, it's still cold in here today, just like it was last week. So I'm going up the ladder, and I'm going to go up there and take a look and see how long we need to cut our boards. And then I'll come right back down. This is a drawing of how it is right now. So we have ceiling joists here, here, and here, and this is the current opening. You'll notice that the opening is not boxed in. Modern construction practices have you actually box this in to transfer the load so you have good support at the openings. Well, they didn't do that. They just kind of sandwiched it in between two joists. So what we need to do is enlarge this somewhat. So currently it's 16 inches wide here and 24 inches wide here. Where we need to be is 20 inches wide this way and 32 inches wide this way. So this is how we're going to solve it. What we'll do is add 2 joists across here like that. So we'll have 2 of them sandwiched in, like that. And then we'll come down here at 32 inches, we'll add 2 more joists across here like that. Let me just go ahead and fill this in so you can see what's going on. This will continue off like that, and that will continue off like that. So now we have double joists going across. And then we'll come along and we'll add another joist across here at 32 inches, right about in here somewhere. So this opening now will be 32 inches wide and 20 inches this way. And what that does is it allows us to take this joist and we'll cut this out, and we're going to remove all of the beadboard that's in this area here. And so that leaves us with a nice framed up hole. Then we're good to go, and we can start building up the platform door that's going to close that up. Well, it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that this house is probably not perfectly square, but what that means is I have to cut 2 boards to one length and then 2 boards to a slightly shorter length. Once I've got it squared off, then I'll mark it off and cut the 2 lengths that I need. Before I make the next cut, I'd like to show you a couple of things. Right here, we have 2 very large knots, and these were tree branches up until a few days ago. So I really don't want those in my finished product, and I have enough lumber here that I can make a cut and chop those off. My friends, this is one big chunk of lumber. Look at that, 2 inches by 6 inches. Real dimensional lumber like they used in the old days. When your wood comes from the sawmill, it usually doesn't have square ends on it. They may be a little bit wavy, or they could be just flat diagonal. So one of the things I like to do is true it up first. So I'll buy my lumber just a little bit extra long so that I can do that. In this case, I don't know, it looks like something tried to take a bite out of it. And there's also a small knot right here, so let's get rid of that. Well, I tried to go up and work in the attic this morning, but it is so cold up there, I'm not going. So we're back in the wood shop where it's a little bit warmer. Now, we were talking about the zero clearance insert. I'm going to go ahead and get this thing set up. So I had to make a slight adjustment here to this tab so that it would fit in the hole. Now, when I put it in, it fits nice, but the problem is it's a little bit below the deck, and we want this thing to be absolutely flush with the deck. So I'm going to show you guys a little tip. This is a dial caliper. You can buy these things fairly inexpensively. And what I'm going to do is first make sure it's zeroed out. I'm going to go ahead and just open this up a ways. I'm trying to measure the distance between this pad right here and the top of the deck. So I lay the caliper in like that, and then I push it down until it seats firmly against the top of the deck like that. So the caliper reads 0.568. So now that we know it's 0.568, we can adjust this to 0.568. Now the easiest thing to do would be just to leave it where it is, put it on here, and I can see that the adjustment screw needs to come out a ways. I'm going to go ahead and turn this screw out a few turns until I think I'm close, and then I'll just come back and remeasure it. So I should be able to slip the caliper over it, and there we are. So I'll go ahead and do that with the other 3 screws, and then we'll try putting it back on the saw. There's a little nub right here that fits down under this lip, and I found that I had to file that down just a little bit because it doesn't quite fit the Grizzly table saw, even though this is made for Grizzly. But once that's done, I can go ahead and slip it in place, and see, it fits in pretty nice. If you're just joining us for the first time, let me explain what's happening here. So this is a zero clearance insert, and I'm going to very slowly run the blade while it's running up through this, and it's going to cut a slot in here, and that's going to give us a very precise, tight seal between the blade and the table saw. And this is really important for the next steps. Well, now you can see how that works. So this thing here perfectly fits the blade, and it's going to make a nice tight seal so that we're not going to have anything falling in there, and also to help any dust chips go straight down and into the dust collector instead of flying out into the room. Okay, I'm going to take this front cover here and just clamp it in place. All right, here's where things start to get scary. So the box is all glued together, but the front panel is not. So I'm going to go ahead and push it in to where the saw blade is, approximately. Somewhere about in there, I think. I'm going to go ahead and raise the saw blade up and make a cut right down the middle of the box. I worked on this off camera, and it was kind of intricate, and I made a few mistakes along the way, but now I've got it figured out. So this is called the index pin, and what I'm going to do is take this little notch right here and put some glue in it. Spread it around really good. But what's important is that that pin be flush and square. So here's our index pin, and we'll let that dry for a little bit. So now here's our secret sauce. We have our front panel with our index pin. We have our slot. So I'm going to take this and slide it over this way. I have another wooden block which is exactly the same thickness as this blade right here. And I'm going to go ahead and sit that right there. That is a spacer block, which I'm going to use to push it until this edge of the slot is perfectly flush with this. In that condition, I can go ahead and put the clamps on. Everything is loose right now. I'm just making sure that that is perfect as possible. And then I'll go ahead and tighten these clamps up just to lock it in place. And then I'll take a pencil and I'm going to mark the corners out here because these are going to get trimmed off. These two ends are trimmed off. Now I'm going to go ahead and lay down a line of glue. I just made a big mess. Okay, now I'm just setting that there temporarily, and I'm going to take my wooden block and lay it back in there because I want to make sure that it's absolutely perfect again. And then we'll go ahead and put the clamps on loosely, just like before. I'm going to push everything in place just to make sure it's good. Make sure that that's good. And I've got to say that feels great. So I'll go ahead and tighten this up now. The accuracy that I do right here will determine how precise my box joints are. Okay, we're going to wipe up the excess glue and let this dry. All right, guys, this is really exciting because the box joint is almost finished, and in a couple of minutes I'm going to show you what a box joint looks like. Well, that didn't work. These are supposed to go together nice. And I can see here that the fingers are wider than the notches, which is not going to work. So let's try a couple of things here and see if we can troubleshoot this. The geometry of this thing is really critical. We have the thickness of the pin, and this was cut off the same piece of wood, so it should be identical. Now we need to have exactly the thickness of the pin right here on this land. And so I can put this in here and feel it, and I can tell you right now, that is perfectly dead on to where it needs to be. So that's not the problem. The pin is okay, the gap is okay, but what about the rest of it? Well, I should be able to put this pin down in the slot. Look at that, it won't go. And just to kind of go along with that, if I take this and I put it along the blade, that blade and this block should be identical, but I can feel my fingernail catching on here, which means that that blade stack isn't thick enough. What that means for us is that we need to make that blade stack thicker. So I'm going to take this apart and add some shims in there and thicken that blade stack up. And that's actually good because it's going to make the stack get thicker in this direction, which is the right direction that we want to make it thicker in. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'd like to talk about philosophy for just a moment here, if you'll bear with me. Sometimes when you work on something and you got your sights set on it and you try it and it doesn't work, it's just real easy to say, you know what, I've had it, I'm done with it. But sometimes you might be really close to the solution. In fact, you might be closer than you really think. And sometimes if you can just step back, sketch things out a little bit and kind of work through it, sometimes you can come up with the answer. And I think we're really close here. So let's see if we can walk through this together. So I'm going to take a dial caliper, and this is going to get just a slight bit technical here, so bear with me. All right, so measuring the distance between both blades is 0.495. Well, that's a little less than a ½ inch. So now let's measure the block, which represents all of the other thicknesses. We have 0.517. Well, that's different than what we had, so I'm going to write those down. So I have 0.495 and 0.567. So this is what we have. We'll do a little bit of third grade math here and see what we come up with. So I need to make up 72 thousandths of an inch. Well, I've got 15 thousandths here, I've got another 15 thousandths, and I have a 12 thousandths. But that isn't thick enough to equal what we need. But we do have a 10 thousandths shim in there, or maybe a 10 or a 12. So let's take a look at this blade here, because this is fairly thin. This is going to give us 82 thousandths. And we need to have 72 thousandths. So if we take that 10 thousandths shim out of there and drop this in its place, mathematically that should get us really close to where we need to be. So let's give that a try. See, math does work. All right, well, it turned out that this was too thick. So what I did is I took it back out and I added a bunch of shims in there and tried it again. And I was able to, by swapping shims in and out and trying different combinations, find just about the perfect size. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this is good and tight now. It is. Now, when you tighten a saw blade, you've got to be really careful, because if this thing slips, you don't want your hand to go right into that blade. Even though it's not rotating, it can still tear you up pretty bad. So we're good here. So let's go ahead and clear off the table and get it put back together. I did that because I made the blade stack a little bit thicker, which means that I had to widen out my channel in the box joint jig. So that should be good now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and set up again. All right, you guys, let's take a look here. These, well, they don't quite fit. Maybe I could hammer them, I'm not sure. I don't want to break it. They do seem just a little bit tight. So let me get out the calipers and see where we're at. So the holes I'll just take one in the middle, for example. That is 0.520, and the finger is 0.520. Well, you know what? These are precise. I mean, they are dead on precise. You cannot get these any closer, which means if I bang on it, it probably would go together. So the only other issue I can see here is that the depth of cut needs to be a little bit more. What do you think? Should I do it? Jeanie says yes. All right, let's go ahead and try it. Oh, look at that. All right, you guys, we have a absolutely precise dead-on box joint, and that is tight. So you couldn't ask for more than that, because if you go the other direction a little bit more, then it's going to be too loose. So I think we're done. This is working great, and now we can go build some box building projects in the future. So signing off from the woodshop. Welcome back to the spooky attic. It warmed up again today, so I was able to get up here and do some work. And I didn't film any of it and didn't photograph any of it, but I want to show you the aftermath. And so what I did is I cut out one of the rafters, and then I reframed the opening in kind of a box frame, so it's nice and sturdy. So take a look at this. So I'm following along the rafter that was cut. I cut it right there, and then I added in that H right there. So that is a double thick timbered H, and it's nailed on all sides and also nailed into the rafter that was cut on this end and the other end there. So everything is nice and sturdy. Now the hole itself isn't that much bigger than it was, but it's big enough to get a furnace through, and certainly big enough to get me through. So I'm going to come back later and cut out the boards that are in the opening and enlarge that to the right size.
Last week we showed you the drape with one panel, and then we cut it in half and opened it up, and a lot of you made this suggestion we should use 2 full panels and push them aside. So we're going to do that today and see how that looks. I do like the fact that they bunch up better on the top. We'll have to overlap them so that the light won't come in the evening. Cars going by and whatnot.
Okay.
So what about in the daytime? Will that still look okay?
Yeah.
Oh, I think that'll look really good.
You like that?
I do. What do you think?
I think it's great. I'll go ahead and gather this one up too.
There we go. What do you think?
What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments, please.
Yes.
It's hard to believe this week has gone by so quickly, but we got a lot done here, and we also had a few other projects that aren't related to this whatsoever that we had to take care of. But next week we'll come back and we'll finish up the attic access cover, and we'll also finish up the draperies, and then we'll be ready for some new projects.
I'm looking forward to it. Mm-hmm. Thank you for watching 1834 Restoration House. Please like, share, and subscribe.